This is We the Sales Engineers podcast, show 231.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramzi Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. I am your host, Ramzi Majaba, and I'm talking to a great guest today by the name of Trevor Spires, and great for many reasons from a personal level, but also he's been through an interesting journey. Most times people fall into sales engineering. It might be a weird transition, but for Trevor, he will talk about his journey specifically. It was very, I would say, conventional, which I think at this point is special because I'm hearing a lot of stories about teachers and musicians. This was a conventional, which for me, it makes it special. So we talked to Trevor about that, his transition, what he had to do to overcome his imposter syndrome, which we all have, and then what he's doing extracurricularly to improve in his job and other stuff. So let's just jump into the show. Let's talk to Trevor, and let's jump into the show. Good morning, Trevor. Hopefully the second time's the charm. How you doing?
It will. It'll work this time. I know it. I'm doing all right, man. How about you?
I'm doing well. So I featured you in one of my YouTube videos, Trevor Spires, because you're doing something that not everybody's doing in terms of sales engineers. But before we get there, who are you? What do you do? And what are you doing here?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. My name's Trevor Spires, as you alluded to. I'm currently a solution architect working at AWS, but I've been in pre-sales now for about 3 years. And I think the best way for me to describe what I do is like I am a sales engineer through and through. Like when I found this type of work, just right on the edge of like technology and people and organizations, I kind of just fell in love. It's the first job I ever got where it's like just the work itself is enough to keep me like really engaged. Like even as an individual contributor, okay. It's the first job where I was like, I can do this for decades. So anyway, I'm on YouTube and LinkedIn and people can follow me on there, but mostly I just like hanging out with other people in tech and talking about the space.
Nice. All right, so we're going to talk about your YouTube channel in a second, but what made you mentioned the people and the technology, but can we dig into it a little bit more? What made you fall in love with the role?
Yeah, I think that there's two things for me. Like the first thing is like I've always loved like really presentational type of things. Like from the time I was young, I was in like drama and I've always done music and like some type of performance. And sales engineering is like a really unique role as a technologist where you can, be an expert on technology and people, but still like there is a performative aspect to like running calls and like creating demos and things like that. So it kind of scratches that creative itch for me. But then probably more important is like, I view like technology is interesting, like making a computer do what you want it to do is kind of cool. But at the end of the day, every technology decision an organization makes is driven by a human decision first. And I think there's just something special about getting to be a part of like the human process to make a technology decision that must come before the engineering decisions to design a solution,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like we look at the iPhone, it's a cool tool, cool tech, especially when it came out, or the what was it? iPad? No, before iPad, what was it? iPod.
Yeah.
Right? If it didn't solve a problem for people, doesn't matter how cool it is, no one would have bought it, but it solved something for them. So yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, and you mentioned solution architect. There are many titles for sales engineering. Sometimes they mean sales engineering, sometimes they mean something different. So when you say solution architect, what in the world does that mean for AWS, or what your current role is?
Yeah. I mean, I think the AWS is kind of starting a trend with their like quote unquote pre-sales force that I'm seeing other organizations adapt to as well. But I think I view solutions engineer, sales engineer, solution architect as kind of like a similar words that can describe the same job. Okay. I think at AWS specifically, because we have such a huge portfolio, like 200 different products and services, we need somebody to be like the quote unquote architect for all of those, like a generalist across all the services. But it's not so dissimilar from what people would think of as like a generalist solution architect or a core solution architect or solution engineer, though.
That's fine, because in the three companies that I worked for, one company, the solution architect was post sales.
Yeah.
Someone would buy the product, and then the solution architect would like put the network together for them. And then in the other company that I worked for, the solution architect was the specialist.
Yeah.
Whereas the generalist SE was the generalist. So it's different from like every company, I guess, is different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even like my last company, we had like at AWS too, we have solution architects in pre-sales and in post-sales. So it's not super. I think it's an interesting strategy to have like the same title across the board, because there are similarities to the function. But yeah, it's something that you always got to figure out, like what type of solution architect role is this when you're interviewing.
And so in many companies, like you hear nightmare stories about specific companies, at least their interview process. Not that they're horrible, it's just that they're extremely hard. So how did you find the role of solution architect, and how did you actually get into it?
Yeah. So for me, like I think like a lot of people working in technology look at these big tech companies, like whether it's Microsoft, Google, Amazon, like Meta, whatever, like as like these places that they kind of aspire to work. I think I always fell in that category, just like kind of like put them up on this pedestal. And so I'd interviewed at Amazon a few times. Oh, excuse me about that. Sorry, man.
This is real life.
It's real life, and my girlfriend's not home to tame the beast today, unfortunately, but hopefully he'll be good. So anyway, I was always interested in it, and I interviewed at Amazon actually 3 different times and didn't make it even through the tech screening. And then at that point, I actually gave up. I said, like, you know what? This sucks. This is too hard. This is stupid. Like, this is not for me. Like, I'm happy at my current job. I'll be fine. Then a recruiter reached out again. I thought I'd give it another try, but I thought it was interesting. Like I didn't get the job until I like stopped putting these companies on a pedestal. And I kind of threw that out the window and said, like, you know what? I'm just going to show up, be myself. And if I'm good enough, if it works, it'll work. And if not, like, that's okay too. I'll be happy either way. So anyway, like there's that aspect. And then of course, like the more obvious thing for most people, I think, is these organizations are known to just be the best paying organizations in technology. And I think most people want to, get as much money for their time spent in their career as they can. And I fall into that category for sure.
That's actually quite interesting. Speaking of money, like I find there's a law of diminishing return at some point. Like I don't know what, I never worked for AWS, but you also hear stories about like, oh, no one's worked at Amazon that hasn't had a crying session or something. Yeah. I've heard that from several people. So is that, can you confirm or deny if that's the case?
Have
you had a crying session? Okay, have you had
I personally I've been working at Amazon for about 7 months now. Have I cried since I've cried, but not because of my work, know, like just normal life stresses.
Stepping on a pin or something.
I've not, that hasn't been my experience here. I think they're definitely, it's such a big company. I think Amazon as a whole, including AWS and retail now, employs like 6 or 7 million people. And so like there's going to be a variety of experiences here. But for me personally, honestly, it's felt like culturally very similar to other large tech firms that I've worked at, just with much more rapid growth than like the IBMs and VMwares that I've worked at in the past.
Okay. And all right, so you mentioned a few companies right now. You've been a solution architect for 7 months. You've been an SE for 3 years. How did you become an SE to begin with? Like, what did you know about the role before you joined, and how did you get that role?
Yeah,
maybe that's a self-serving question. I don't know, but
yeah, no, I think you set yourself up on that one, Ramsey. No. So I worked in, like a lot of people, I worked at a vendor before I got into sales engineering. I think that's a common path. You work at a company that has sales engineers, and then there's you can kind of shift internally. So I was at VMware working in professional services, and it was fun, but I was traveling a lot. And also, like, I would have a new customer like every week or every 2 weeks. I didn't get to build like long-term relationships. And so talk to some of the SEs there. I realized that they got to do more like presentations and whiteboard type of stuff that I thought could be fun, and that they got to form more long-term relationships. And as well, as the compensation aspects just being better than professional services at that particular company. So I knew I was interested, but I had to fill in a lot of blanks. And so I started reading books and doing the typical stuff, but I actually latched on to your podcast back in, it must have been like late to mid 2019 when I was like just starting to apply for those roles. And for me, like at the end of the day, like I was qualified to become an SE. The hurdle for me was I needed to convince an SE manager that they could trust me to be an SE.
Yeah.
And I think the podcast and like reading books, watching videos, but just like understanding the vernacular, like the day to day and like how to kind of talk the talk was super beneficial to me whenever I was meeting with SE managers at the start. Because I didn't know about like how to do discovery and I didn't really know a lot about how to present, but like being able to speak intelligently to it and have an understanding of what the role is, like from just kind of listening to podcasts and other people in the space was invaluable to me for sure during the interview process.
So, did you know you were going to like the role, or was it a risk?
Huge risk. I didn't know. I think there's really not any way to know, and I think like a lot of engineers, I was scared to try it because it's like, what if I do this and I don't like it? But at the end of the day, I viewed it as relatively low risk. Like I could try it, and like I knew plenty of people who tried it, didn't like it, and then went back to pro serve or support or just like operations type of role. So I thought, I didn't see much downside to it, and then I knew pretty quickly that it was a good fit for me. After I started the role, though.
Nice. Okay, we're going to talk about that, but for me personally, I became an engineer because I didn't want to talk to people.
Yeah.
So becoming an SE, knowing that I'm going to have to talk to customers, that was a big fear for me, and I had to really think about it. But I was severely underpaid, and they pretty much doubled my salary. I'm like,
yep,
I'll talk to people, and turns out it's not as bad as I had thought in my mind. Okay, so
yeah, I feel that actually. I think that's normal. Like I was really. If I think back to those first few customer calls, I had to have been so ineffective and like so nervous. Like no, like it was a learning process for sure. And like I think like a lot of things, like that social element of it, it's just like it becomes easy as you do it. Even somebody I consider myself an introvert, even though I may not seem like it. I'm recharged from like being alone in my room or like hanging out with my girlfriend. And but just like anything, it's like working out. You get used to it, and then you might even fall in love with it. Like some people do.
It's like early on in people's career, I give permission to my clients to not say a word in the first few meetings beyond just saying who they are. Like you don't have to, right? If you have nothing useful to add, you're still in a phase where you're absorbing everything. But it 100%. It will become easier, and then we'll start asking the usual questions like, hey, how many users or how many ports or what are the speeds and feeds, right? Talk about features versus actually solving the problem. But that comes, and people think that I'm an SE today, tomorrow I'm solving problems. Like, no, the only problems you're solving are your own at this point until you become efficient at it. So
I would say like in addition to your podcast, another kind of accelerator that I had in my career was I lucked out, and my very first account manager, my first sales rep partner was a former SE. So he had just started. So it was like amazing. Like I got to get proficient really fast because I had somebody who'd been doing it for like 5 years after every single call, getting on the horn and being like, okay, try this next time. You can do that better like that. You can't really plan that. Like most account managers weren't SEs before, but I really lucked out to have a good account manager and mentor there.
And that was at VMware, right?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I find VMware one of the good companies to be a brand new SE at, just because they coach you, they teach you, and maybe you lucked out you had an SE, former SE as a account manager. I just find like I've attended some of the sessions that they do, and their questions are just like amazing. The way they ask their questions, they're taught, or I guess you were taught. Yeah. I don't know if that's true or not. You can confirm or deny. We can do that later. Going back to professional services, what are some of the skills that you took with you from being a professional services engineer to a sales engineer?
Oh yeah. The number one most important skill that I learned as a professional services engineer is the ability to like confidently engage in a project that you're not an expert in today, right? So like in professional services, you would get asked, hey, a customer needs somebody to help them optimize their Linux environment. Yeah. Well, I've never done that, but like we need somebody to do it, and nobody else on my team can do it. And so that ability to like hear something and be like, I bet in a week I can figure that out good enough to deliver it to a customer. That was the most important skill that I learned, and it's a combination of a skill and maybe the confidence / stupidity to just be like, hey, I'll give it a try if nobody else is going to, you know. And I've taken that with me. That is even more important as an SE. You don't have to go quite as deep as you would have to in like a professional services or delivery role, but just like that self-confidence of being able to commit to something and kind of estimate how long it will take you personally to spin up on it is extremely valuable now, and it really taught me my limits early on in my career.
So in professional services, was there more of a generalist role and like then specialized roles, or were you generalist in everything as well?
So I was a networking and security specialist in my title when I was in professional services, but the thing is, like that's what we staffed, but like just because we have that like staffed as specialist doesn't mean that's the services customers are buying. Right. And so you have to maintain a certain percentage of like billable hours. So that means that you have to become a generalist really quick to hit your targets in those type of roles.
That's fine. And like I've worked with professional services, and the way I've seen salespeople sell professional services is that, oh, this professional services person that coming is the expert in whatever you're bringing them in. And then we have that conversation with the professional services person, like, I'll figure it out. I'm not an expert, but I'll figure it out. And we've had situations where they didn't figure it out, and that blew back on us big time. So professional services is a great role before becoming an SE, just because you get to learn all these different things and these different skills. And so one thing you mentioned earlier, like having the confidence to be able to figure it out. Did you ever feel like when you became an SE, because now you're even more of a generalist, you have a lot more products, was there an imposter syndrome creeping in that, hey, I don't know all this stuff, how am I going to sell it? Or if there wasn't, like, how did you feel about the first few months?
As an SE, honestly, I knew that I knew the technology. So I was very lucky to move into an SE representing a product line. It was at VMware. They have their NSX product line. So I was an expert in that already from my time in professional services. So it wasn't about the technology for me. My imposter syndrome came from just like after every call, wondering if I presented the ideas that I was presenting well, if the customer really understood what I was saying. Like most of my imposter syndrome was around that, like just not knowing. I never had done a lot of PowerPoints or demos. Like, was that a good demo? Like, did it resonate? And now I still ask those same questions, just like not as much pressure, but certainly at first I got a little too, I think this is common in a new role. I was a little obsessive. Like I would lose sleep. I would stay up late at night, just thinking about the PowerPoint or the demo I had the next morning. And I don't think I had to do that looking back, but certainly that was where I spent most of my time, was like, how do I communicate these ideas clearly in a compelling way? Because that was, to me, that's the skill and the part that I didn't have a lot of experience with when I started.
So how did you overcome that?
I overcame it by consulting with peers, like getting mentorship, first of all. And then also, I think just doing it and like putting yourself out there, like be willing to try new things. Like what I found was about 6 months into the role, like my manager was coming to me saying, hey, I loved how you presented this security concept on a call. We show that to the rest of the team. And so I was lucky to have good leaders that like saw me really trying to figure it out and trying to experiment with new things, especially with a team that had been doing things the same way for like a few years. And they saw that as like, oh, here's like some new energy that we can show. And so that gave me a lot of confidence, like presenting internally and being able to like coach peers through things. And that just came from good managers, like listening to me and watching me do it. And I guess like agreeing that I had a decent way of communicating certain ideas.
So you walked into a company that has a way of doing things.
Yeah.
Right? And then you took that way and you kind of tweaked it. You like a lot of people that I know like try to stick within, oh, they're doing it this way, it must be working. Why am I going to change it? But you went ahead and tried different things. Who gave you permission to try these different things? And I guess I'll stop there. Who gave you permission to try these different things?
Nobody gave me permission to try it, but I'm a big believer in like, so there's what you do on your team, there's what your management tells you, but then like as an employee, as an individual contributor, especially at a large company, you have to be listening like 3 levels up. So like you need to listen to your boss, but you also need to go to meetings with your boss's boss and your boss's boss's boss. And I recognized at the time VMware was going through a transition and still is going through a transition where the company has been traditionally like a company that sells like SKUs and licenses, and they want to kind of modernize to being more of a subscription-based company. Well, that means that you sell differently. That actually changes the cycle and the way you message certain products. And so we had that high level strategy, but we were still giving the same message like that we would use to sell like just like the big bomb. Instead of in a subscription world, you might start smaller and then grow in the account over time. It's a different strategy. So I was just nobody gave me permission. I just tried it. But I was lucky that what I was trying was like a direct response to like hearing messaging from our senior leaders and trying to adapt to what they were saying, maybe even before like my direct management had made that same change.
Okay, that's very interesting. That's so you basically, if I understand correctly, you fixed a problem for yourself based on the information you've heard, and that led to fixing problem for others.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because in short, like to make it more specific, like we had like there was a really expensive product line that you had to invest heavily in, and we released a new SKU that was a much lower point of entry from a cost perspective, but we didn't have a message to align with that. And so I was like, well, we need a message to align with that. It can't be the same old message if we're trying to sell that more tactical SKU. And so had to figure something out to get customers' attention.
Yeah, okay, but I see that a lot where, especially right now, companies that used to sell perpetual licenses are now selling subscription licenses.
Yep.
But when I talk to salespeople, it's like, if I sell the subscription licenses, I'm not going to make my quota because my quota is based on the perpetual licenses we've been selling. So I will continue selling the perpetual licenses. How did you get along with your account manager when you kind of tried to shift into selling subscription or like the lower priced SKUs that is repetitive versus one-time larger item?
So like as soon as you said this, my heart like started racing, man, because I've gotten in so many conversations about this. So like there's 2 aspects of this. Like for the how do you influence your account manager, the first thing is like I convinced, like just by talking to them, they were very open. We had a good relationship, but like the conclusion we drew was because like we can sell the perpetual SKUs and subscription SKUs. Like it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like we should like, but let's not miss out on the subscription business just because you make more commission on the perpetual, right? So it's not a zero-sum game. It is basically the idea. But then part, so that's a little bit of like influencing your account manager. But then the bigger part of it was for me, like I just knew what was right. And like, I look at my job, like not just as selling product, like my job is to do what's right for my customers. And so there comes a point where you kind of have to put your foot down. You know your own kind of like beliefs on what's right for your customer. And luckily at that organization, I had the autonomy as an SE to have that voice and like make those decisions for myself. Because it's not always right for a customer to buy a big perpetual license. Sometimes it's better for them to do a subscription model.
So if I understand correctly, you're not replacing perpetual business with subscription business. You're just adding subscription business on top of the perpetual business based on your customers' needs, not your own.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, that's pretty much. I mean, like that's not always true. Like there is an aspect of it that like you're going to cannibalize. Like you could potentially cannibalize like your perpetual business with like a lower subscription deal. Like, but like again, like that's all problems that like companies, if they're going to do that, they got to figure out how to pay people correctly. Like that's not my problem as an individual contributor. And I'm not the type of person
your commission
who
also that's affected.
it is, but I'm just like, I'm just the type of person who doesn't care about the extra 20 grand enough to do the wrong thing, you know? And so like, I'll lose 20 grand because I'm doing the right thing for the customer. And I know over the long term, like that's going to build more trust with the organizations I work with.
Well, you're not losing 20 grand, you're winning whatever you make, because they're very likely, if they're not going to go for the perpetual, they're very likely you would have lost the deal. I was talking to a gentleman yesterday, and he's brand new, and he's worried about, his main concern is hitting quota. Like if he doesn't hit quota, is he doing a bad job? And we kind of have to figure out, like, let him know that the SE's role is not to hit quota. That's the salesperson's job. Our job is to help the customer solve their problems through our own tools, which will then lead to us hitting quota, hopefully. But it's a shift in mentality, like where, I'm being assessed by hitting quota. Because if I don't know what your performance review looks like, but most companies that I've worked for, my performance review is like 60% of it is based on if I hit quota or not.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was my experience at VMware. Like they put a big emphasis on it. At Amazon, I don't even have a quota, which is awesome. Like that's the way it should be at this particular company with the products that we have here. But yeah, at VMware, that's a big part of it. Again, it's like you have to be aware of it, but not obsess over it too when it comes to the quotas. You know, like. But yeah, you're right. That's how performance is measured. The way I look at things is like the second I need to compromise my own beliefs to hit a quota is whenever I have to start looking for a new job, though. It becomes like a difficult, like I lose sleep at night feeling like I'm incentivized to do something that may not be right.
It's the grammar rule. You're familiar with the grammar rule?
I never heard of it. What is that?
If it's something you tell your grandmother about and she's proud of you, then you did a good thing.
Yeah.
If she's upset, then you know what? Don't do it.
The grandma rule. I like that.
Yeah, I didn't come up with it. I heard it somewhere. It's just like be proud about what you're doing. Don't be proud about stealing from people. Some people are like that, but be proud of the work you're doing. All right, and I want to shift a little bit. So, you also have a YouTube channel where you talk about AWS, right? And it's all about AWS solution architecture, certification, that sort of thing. First off, what is that channel?
Yeah, the channel, it's just under my own name, Trevor Spires. I do everything under my own name on YouTube. If you search Trevor Spires, you'll find it there. It's really just a mechanism for me. I'm excited to dig more into YouTube and like what it is as a kind of mechanism to scale yourself. But like the way I view it is like we all Google stuff all the time, and like sometimes you're trying to learn something and it's harder to learn than it should be. And so like it took me a week to learn something and I can boil that down into like a 10-minute YouTube video, I know people will watch it. I think maybe not a lot because it's niche stuff, but that's how I view it, as just a way to help people with things that I would have liked to have had help with.
So how did you get started on YouTube? A lot of people are running into the same thing that you are, where I could have learned this in like 5 seconds if someone did the proper video, but no one thinks, let me do that video. So what made you do it?
Well, it was probably the pandemic is what prompted me to do it at first. Like I've always been interested in video media. Like I took classes in high school and like had made like some short films like in a past life. So I always like liked the medium. But when COVID happened and customers weren't really talking to anybody, I just like started making videos and like putting them out. And by the way, like those videos did terribly. Like I'm actually looking at the first ones that I made. All of them still 2 years later, less than 500 views in the first 5. But I just kept doing it and experimenting. And then like I hit this point, maybe like 6 months in, where I started to learn like, here is a video, and then here's a video that gets traction, and like being able to like learn the difference. And I'm still going to make videos that flop, but making it easy for myself to create content and then experimenting was really how it worked. I think how it works for most people that make any type of content, really.
Okay. I'm just thinking about that. Like at a minimum, if a customer asks you a question and you already have a video on it, you just send them the video. Like, hey, I did a video about that.
Yeah, It definitely can help with customer. I actually don't use it that way. Like I would say I very rarely send somebody a video. The amazing thing about YouTube is that there are a lot of eyeballs on that platform, and like if you make something that appeals to the algorithm or like search or whatever, people will just find it organically. So I don't ever use it as like an outbound mechanism where I send a video. Like maybe I've done that a couple of times, but what's more common is I have customers come to me that like send me a message or reach out to me on LinkedIn asking questions prompted from a video that I made. Every once in a while, this awesome thing will happen where I'll show up to a call and a customer will know my face from a YouTube video, or even a hiring manager. I've had that happen before where they've watched a video of mine before an interview. That's amazing because just like you and I like kind of already feel like we know each other a little bit because I've listened to the podcast and you've seen my videos. The exact same thing happens with a customer or with a hiring manager where like they actually trust you more just because they've seen your face and they've seen you do something that they respect before the call. So it's pretty interesting.
So you mentioned customers message you and ask you questions. Is it like any customer around the world, or is it your specific customers?
So that's a challenge with it, right? Is it I've never like really turned it into a direct like sales deal, right? Because the things I'm really passionate about helping individual contributors and like other engineers. Like that's really what gets me excited. So a lot of people reach out with questions about technology, but it's actually more common these days for people to ask me about like certifications and career planning and things like that, which I would say like I get more out of that personally, just because if you can help somebody get a new job or like advance their career, like I can't think of many things that are more rewarding than that.
Nice. So it's not, like individuals reach out to you, not necessarily ask you a question about their environment, but more how can I improve at this certification or that certification?
That I get a lot. Every once in a while I get technical questions on certain products that I've made videos about, and I'll answer them if I can, but it's just less common. Like the trend is people reaching out about, just because the content I'm making is like a lot of cert and career focused stuff lately. It's also a benefit, like even like in large organizations. So like at VMware and at AWS, like it sounds strange, but like doing social media and content marketing for yourself helps me network internally too. So like I just got pulled into a project that I would have never gotten pulled into. It's like a super great high visibility project at Amazon because a marketing leader found one of my YouTube videos. So like there's a lot of different angles that can help, but like you got to figure out how to get eyeballs on your stuff is really that drives a bunch of different, it just opens up how many options you have of different things to work on.
So, all right, a couple of things. Like for me personally, I try to avoid getting eyeballs internally because I was worried about them trying to shut me down, which happened in a previous company. Like they tried to shut me down. My company that I work for, they're very supportive right now. But did you have that fear when you got started? Like, hey, will AWS be okay with me doing this?
Yeah, I absolutely had the fear, and I probably had 100 people that work here, maybe not 100. I probably had 10 people that work here say, "Hey, be really careful with social media, like blah blah blah." Similar to like when I'm thinking of like a new way to present an idea to a customer, I don't ask for permission on a lot of stuff that I know is not like wrong. Like I know my intentions are good, so I just kind of did it, and I was nervous about it. But at the same time, it's like, I know that I would never say anything like, it would be foolish for me to ever say anything negative about AWS in a video or like when I'm presenting myself, it would be a career limiting move. So like, I just try to, I'm not going to make a video about like that paints my employer to negative light. And I think as long as you avoid that, you're fine. But if you're making content that makes your boss or your employer look bad like that's you should probably reconsider, like think about, is there something else I can make,
like if you don't like your employer, I mean, there are some critiques that you can provide that are fine, but don't badmouth your employer. The reason they tried to shut my podcast down wasn't anything related to the podcast. It's just I interviewed a former colleague that turns out the higher ups didn't like. Right? So they were fine up until that point, and once I hit that point, it's like they tried to tell me to stop, but my manager at the time didn't tell me about it. Like he just protected me, which is what great managers do. and he didn't tell me about it until he left the company. It's like, watch out, this is what's happening.
Interesting.
And so 2 months later, I left the company as well. So you have options, basically. All right, and why don't you, like, if you created a video? I mean, I know you're focused more on certifications right now and career, but if you did a video that's AWS where you talk about how you can solve a certain problem and a customer reaches out to you, do you have a problem sending them that video, or it just hasn't happened yet? They haven't had the opportunity to do that yet?
Yeah, no, I definitely don't have a problem doing that. Like,
Okay.
if I had something relevant for them, but I think at an organization like AWS, we have so much existing content and assets, honestly, that like that there's always something for me to send already that's like official AWS, like most of the time. So I lean towards that just because it's usually better than and more targeted than what I make if it's like a technical question that a customer has.
So why did you create your own channel if there already are information around the world about that?
I mean, I guess why did I do it? Just because why I did it is because I thought it'd be fun, and I was right. It is fun, and again, I see it as a mechanism for me to connect with other people in the industry by creating content. Like if you're familiar, if anybody listening is familiar with the idea of content marketing, it's like you create content, you attract eyeballs to that content, and then you use that to sell something eventually, consulting services or whatever. Like I view YouTube and LinkedIn and social media as like content marketing for myself, for my own personal brand, right? And I don't know where it's going to go because like I'm still like only 2 years into it, but like in the fullness of time, if I have a big enough following, if I can continue to grow it, like I'm going to have a lot of options to, work for myself or add value to an employer, or maybe try a new type of advocacy or role or marketing role in organizations. So I would say it's really just, I think about how does it help me develop new skills, and then also like how does it help other people? Like those are the only two things I really think about.
The way I see it is everybody has their own style in doing things, and different styles connect with different people. And AWS does, like, they have great videos, great marketing videos that's very targeted, very specific. But when you put a face, like Trevor's face, on a video, now you made it human as well, and you have your way of connecting with people.
Oh,
so
100%.
It adds different value.
And you have to ask yourself, who would you trust, right? Would you trust a multi-billion-dollar corporation, or would you trust an individual that maybe seems a little bit like you, right? Like I think people are much more likely to trust another individual speaking for themselves in an authentic way than a multi-billion-dollar corporation across the board, right? And that has nothing to do with Amazon. It's just like I think that's just human nature. I think people generally distrust large corporations.
Anything that I don't like, they have make decisions behind the scenes, and then things pop out. It's trusted less. But like I have my YouTube, like I guess, process where if I'm trying to create a video, I always have to have a question that I'm trying to answer, and who is it trying to go in to help? And that's something that we can do differently from large corporations, where their goal is to pump out their information. Our goal, it could be that we want to help people. Some do, some don't, but generally speaking, that's the case. Any experiences that you want to share about your YouTube journey? Like, well, anything that pops to mind, struggles, good things that have happened.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that honestly it's gone as well as I feel like it could have. Like I don't really have any goals for it. I'm just trying to keep it really fun. I think the things that come to mind for me are like, if anybody wants to experiment with creating video content, like getting a setup that's easy for you. Like you need to just reduce friction between like, I have an idea and that's now a 5-minute video. Because if it takes you 2 days to make a 5-minute video, you're going to make a lot fewer than if you make it really easy for yourself. So like that is actually, I think, the most important thing, because then experimentation becomes really easy. Experimentation is very important for a platform like YouTube. And the more stuff you make, you learn. And that's what's beautiful about YouTube, is they give you all these data and analytics. And so you get to learn like, okay, well, people found this video via organic search. How can I make other videos that people will find via organic search? Or people found this via their homepage recommendation, which means that you've found yourself in a little YouTube niche. Like, how can I continue to capitalize on the algorithm rewarding that type of content? And so that's just been like a learning process, though. I don't think I would do much differently, except for I probably would have learned a little bit more about how to create a good thumbnail and a good title earlier in my YouTube process, because that is like, if you don't have something interesting that people will click on, YouTube doesn't reward it with the algorithm, and the videos just kind of get stuck in YouTube hell, as some people call it.
Yeah, I've been doing this podcast for almost 4 years. I started, I think, YouTubing consistently the last year, and now I'm getting better at thumbnails and creating the right titles and doing all that. So yeah, it takes time, but at least I find if you get started, if you don't care about the results specifically, just care about the habit, the results may or may not come, but at least you learn something while doing it.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, man, it is time to move on to the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions I ask pretty much every guest, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. What do you love? And we can take this in 2 different ways. What do you love about being a sales engineer, or what do you love about being on YouTube? Whichever answer you want to provide, I'll take that.
Well, as corny as it might sound, I think the thing I love about them, I'm a big fan of people finding like fundamentals that drive them and motivate them in life. For me, one of the most fundamental things that I love today, I'll always love, is I love helping other people, like other regular people like me. Like that, I think of myself as just like a regular guy. I like to help other regular people. And I think both through YouTube and as a pre-sales engineer, that's what I get to do, whether it's helping a customer like get a win internally at their organization, or helping somebody get the motivation or like the track that they need to go get a cert. Like, I view all of that as like a way that I'm actually helping other people improve their lives. And so that's what I love about it. And I get to actually see that happen and occur through both of those avenues, which is just like super exciting for me. So I think that's, I always say that. To me, it sounds a little corny and cheesy to be like, I just like to help people, but that's just the truth. Like that, if I get to do that, I think I would love anything that feels like I'm helping like my fellow humans in some way.
It is very rewarding, and even if we think about it from a selfish perspective, it makes us feel better about it. But I don't think you're anything. I don't think you're a regular guy, Trevor. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that the beard actually gives you superpowers, doesn't it?
There is something to it. Yeah, the beard does something, man. I don't know. I don't know if it gives me superpowers, but it certainly gives me more confidence than if you had to see like my tiny little chin and the rest of my face. You know, it's like I can hide behind the mask anyway.
Okay, good. Beyond the beard, what would you change about sales engineering?
What would I change about sales engineering? Well, I'll give you a better answer. Here's not something I'm going to change. Here's something that I know is going to change and is already changing. And some people are hip to it, some people aren't. The way customers buy technology is changing. Like we talked a little bit about perpetual versus subscription type of licenses. The truth is, like, every organization wants to like try, experiment, and buy. Well, not every organization, but a lot of organizations prefer that model. And so sales engineering today is, and for a lot of like more traditional organizations, is structured of like, we build a use case and we build to like this big bill of materials. But that is absolutely changing, and it changes the job of what a sales engineer does when we move to models like a cloud or SaaS model, where you can start by paying $10 a month, $20 a month. And then once you know you're going to get value, then you can scale. And so it tips the pendulum towards customers in a really cool way, but it also changes our job as SEs, because instead of like selling a story or a vision or an idea, it's actually more about like customer enablement and like how do I accelerate their path to using the technology versus buying the technology. That's not going to be an overnight change, by the way. It's not like we snap our fingers. Like, this is going to happen over decades, but it's already happened like in a substantial rate over the last 10 years, and since I've been in the industry in only 3 years.
I think it's the same set of skills. Like even enabling customers, you're pretty much selling them on trying different things with the product, right?
True. Yeah.
So like you need to sell them on the vision of like, hey, if you try this little thing here, it's going to save you X amount there. But yeah, I agree with like it's different kind of selling. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of the skills are the same. You're correct. It's just, I guess it's not the skill set that's changing. It's the sales motion that changes a little bit.
It's the outcome that you're looking for. The outcome is changing. What the desirable outcome that we're looking for is changing. Okay. And so is the customer. Because we used to do like free POCs and then they'd have to buy $1 million worth of equipment. And now we're charging for a POC and they don't have to buy as much. So yeah, I like that. All right, question number 3, which is 3 in Spanish. I just make stuff up.
Wait, that's French, right?
Yeah, it is. It is French. Is there any book or resource you recommend for people who want to become sales engineers or who are people in your spot?
You know, I think I'm a big advocate. If you haven't done a lot of like reading in like self-help type books, like all the usual suspects, you know, like Habits of Highly Influential People, like How to Win Friends and Influence People. Like those are all great books. I read those a lot in my early 20s, like when I was just kind of curious, wanting to learn about people in business. I think any books on like human psychology and business are really fascinating, and a good read for SEs or anybody that wants a sales or business centric role. More recently, I've actually gravitated away from the self-help stuff and more towards like, I love reading biographies. So Steve Jobs' biography is really great. Einstein's biography is excellent. It's cool to learn about like these really extreme personalities and what they've done to be successful. Not that we'll replicate that, but anyway, the one book though that I'll say is probably more targeted towards the audience of SEs that I enjoyed is this book called Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder that I read last year. And it kind of touches a little bit more on what we were just talking about, is how like the motion changes a little bit and like the way customers interact with buyers is changing. And I think that book does a pretty good job of simplifying that idea and explaining the differences.
That's an interesting thought right now, based on the conversation. Like, hey, where the way sales engineering or sales is changing, wouldn't you say buying is getting easier because they get to try things before they make that big risky decision of, you know, spending millions of dollars? Like, I'll spend $10, see if it works, and that's cheaper than spending $1 million and knowing that, and then finding out it doesn't work.
Well, I think the title is definitely like a more it's an interesting title to get your attention. I think there's truth. Like technically, it is easier to click the button and buy the product. However, I believe it's actually probably harder to buy than ever because there's more options than ever. Like if you have a given solution or use case, you've now got to compare 10 different vendors from big companies to startups solving the same problem, and that's really challenging. And so the book talks a lot about how you kind of guide customers through that process of enablement to get to the decision in a unique way.
I mean, I think it was Gavin, and he's the CEO of Consensus, and he's been on the podcast before. I'll leave a link to this episode in the show notes. But yeah. All right, last question of the Not So Fi round. Is there a habit you're working on today to improve in your personal or professional life?
Yeah, I think for my personal and professional life, like this has been a habit I've been working on since I was like 18 years old, though. It was just, you know, I'm going to sound like a hippie with a beard, right? But it's like, I just to be like more present and aware, like in the moment, like I typical, like always thinking about the future, like what can I do better? How can I improve? Like probably a lot of people that listen to this podcast are wired that way. And I think that can sometimes like that's important as a place, but also you can overlook a lot of details if you're trying to think 2 steps ahead of a customer in a conversation versus just really trying to be there and listen. And it also, and in my personal life, like I'm really trying to just draw boundaries of like when I step away from my desk at 5 or 6 p.m. that like I can put work on a shelf and not like ideate about it after hours, which is hard. Like I still struggle with that. I'm like a very work-oriented person, but I'm really striving to get that thing they call work-life balance. And I think I've done a really good job over the last couple of years, but I also know that it's going to be something I'm working on for the rest of my life. And that's okay. But that's always going to be a priority for me, because I've gone through the burnout thing. I've gone down those rabbit holes of just exhausting myself, and it doesn't feel good. Don't want it to happen too many more times between now and the end of this thing.
Okay. I think I had a conversation with someone like earlier about work-life balance. I think it's a myth. There is no balance. I think there's work-life balancing. It's an action, not a state. Like we have to always, which is what you said, you're continuously striving to create boundaries, but sometimes work will pull you in, and you drop a little bit on the other sides, and then you kind of balance the other way around. Okay. Trevor, we're at the end of our show. Is there any question that you were hoping I was going to ask you and I didn't?
No, I actually do have a list of 4 things that I wanted to discuss. I did not tell you about them, and we hit every single one. So you nailed it. This was perfect, man.
Okay, cool. I'm glad to hear that. I am sad about the fact that I wasn't able to ask you anything about your musical instruments. We'll leave that for another episode where you can come in and jam. I don't jam, I just listen. And thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a fun conversation, Ramsey. Thank you for having me on.
It's my pleasure. And this brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Trevor, for coming on and chatting about your journey. Stay tuned for more stuff that Trevor and I are working on together to help folks who want to become SEs, or folks who are already SEs and want to improve, find another job. So we're going to be working together more in the future as well, because I enjoyed working with him. I thought it was fun. I thought he was engaging. So let me know what you think. What did you like about the show? Let me know in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. And with that, I'm signing off.